So thank you, everyone. So I'm very privileged to start the panel today on the topic of insurer strategies for enhancing sustainability. We all heard from Michelle. Sustainability comprises both environmental preservation and societal stability. And the insurance industry definitely has a unique position to bring in some objectivity to the discussion on sustainability. And this is what this panel is all about. And I'm very glad to have two panelists with me. On my left is Rowan Douglas, CEO Climate Risk and Resilience from Howden Group. And then over on the far left is Paul O'Neill, President of Commercial Lines APAC of Sompo International. So let's dive right in. So in Swiss Re, when we think about sustainability on the life and health side, we talk about the 3 A's, the accessibility, availability, and affordability. So I'm also curious to start with the same question that I asked Michelle. What does sustainability mean for both of you?
Me? Wow, it's bright up here, isn't it? I feel like
it is.
Bright lights. Well, yeah, thanks for the question. It's a lot of what Michelle was saying resonated with me as I was thinking about this panel. Sustainability is such a huge topic, and you know, it's almost somewhere between technical and religious. It's a huge area. But I'll give you a point of view from Sompo. Sompo has a purpose which is to provide health, security, and well-being to society. So that's core to what Sompo believe is their purpose as an organization. And within that, sustainability is one of those areas where if it's providing a sustainable society for the aging population or providing more resilient society, and also providing solutions for climate issues. So I think from my perspective, sustainability it needs to be core to the company, but it also is addressing increasing exposures and ensuring that we can provide solutions for society to continue to be able to deal with those sort of evolving exposures as we see them, from climate to whatever, COVID to whatever.
Well, Daisy, I'll start with a couple of observations I've picked up just this morning here at the forum. Two short ones and one slightly longer one. So I must say, when I think now of sustainability, I think of Alex Mazarsky, who informed me this morning that in 1983, he received his certificate of his first membership of the IAS. So after 40 years in the IAS, and still probably able to wear the same suit that he bought in 1983, I think Alex is probably the epitome of sustainability. So congratulations on that anniversary, Alex. I'm just touched by Michelle's speech, actually, because, again, I just want to perhaps reflect on our industry's role in sustainability and what we can all do, literally, as a group. So, as some of you may know, Michelle, as well as being chair of Zurich, is chair of an organization called the Insurance Development Forum, which brings together the industry, the World Bank, and governments, and will be in force at the COP, the big climate summit in Dubai, not just sitting at the table, but forming the table of how the world should share and manage climate and natural disaster risks in some of the absolutely sort of focal points of that meeting. And it's very unusual for any industry to be in that position. There's no other industry that has a group that's co-led by led by the industry, co-led with international institutions. And as many of you know, but not all of you may know, that organization was conceived right here in the IIS 10 years ago. And it was conceived because a group of people sitting in a room like this realized the unique role and understanding that our industry had but knew we had to convene the commanding heights of international public policy and finance. And there was only one organization that could actually convene that group of people. And I remember Mike Morrissey took a big risk in doing so. I remember that then Prince of Wales came to London in 2014, and around that we conceived a meeting. And for 5 years, the IS incubated that organization, so that now insurance is, and you will read about it in a month's time, will be at the heart of what's called the loss and damage mechanism for helping the Global South. I would just want to say that, and Michelle now chairs the IDF, Ken Mungan, Alex himself, many people here are intimately involved. I would say that let us use that as just one example of how how our industry, through this organization, could do the same things in cyber risk, in the challenges of mental health and mental well-being. There's absolutely no reason why this organization cannot foment those sort of changes, because let me tell you, leaders outside of our industry, whether they be from governments or from wider financial sector, are craving our expertise, are craving our hard-won knowledge of how you integrate so many risks into structured decision-making. What we have to be better at is convening, but also explaining what we do in a language that people understand. So for me, that is what sustainability really means. As Michelle said, if you didn't call it insurance, you would probably call it sustainability. Never mind the verbal foliage that we pick up at the, it's a bit like going to the botanical gardens. We use these nice words like sustainability or green or ESG or resilience. That's necessary to connect with audiences, but at its heart, it's all about risk. And the challenge that we have at the moment is you cannot manage risk until collectively you're deciding what you value, what you're deciding you want to protect. And I think the insurance sector can help society, whether it's across the world or across generations, develop a shared understanding of what it is that needs to be protected, what it is actually that needs to be valued, and how to share and manage that. And that's a great role for this organization.
That really resonates, and I totally agree that the insurance industry has a key role to play. And by the way, we will have time for audience questions later, so I invite you to type in your questions in the app if you have any. And so sustainability, an important topic, but at the same time, it has also become increasingly controversial. So how has this impacted your conversations with your clients or business partners when they want to think about how to manage risks?
So I think that's an interesting point. But let's look back over the last 10 years and sort of imagine, why has it become controversial now? And there's a lot of changes of why it's become controversial. There's some significant geopolitical issues, there's inflation, there's interest rates, there's many issues that have got us to a point now that the whole sustainability discussion is controversial because it's all linked. If it's a geopolitical issue, then that causes a supply chain problem, as in Russia, Ukraine, and then that causes commodity increases, then that causes a focus on being able to provide that trilemma of security and environmental and safety around energy supplies to your own population, which increases national. The whole thing is linked, and therefore, one of the things I find fascinating. So I came into the industry as a chemical engineer and ended up doing risk engineers, traveling around the world, and I think one of the issues that is really true is that people really struggle with understanding how to deal with their own area of risk. So how do they protect their own area of risk? And if you looked at the project, if you looked at sustainability as a global project, and you looked at what the project management team was, for example, it's not consistent in terms of approach. So it's controversial because there's so many different interests and opinions, and there's so many different variables at play at the moment. So, if it's China wanting to secure its own power, I'm in Asia, I live in Asia, 48% of the power production is here from coal. So to be told that they have to drive a energy transition program when they're still developing, it's difficult to get some of these things over the line. So I think there's many variables why it's kind of controversial. And I think it's a moment in time that we're seeing all of these sort of come together. And that's why I think we've got this sort of controversial issue. Now, when I talk to clients, and I'm talking about clients particularly in Asia, because that's my area, it's, from our perspective, is what can we do as an insurance industry to help them through the challenges that they face. So when we talk to clients, not just around traditional risk transfer, but also alternative risk transfer, we're trying to find solutions that they need to be able to facilitate the transition program, but also how they secure the energy they need for their own clients, and how they also hit their carbon net zero target. So our focus really is understanding all of the underlying exposures that clients are facing, and then going to them and talking to them about how we can provide a solution for them to be able to achieve their targets. So I don't. It's a very complicated situation at the moment globally. Our approach is that, particularly in Asia, where we're facing really demand for increase of power, if you like, in some of these countries, or in Australia, for example, carbon net zero targets they have to reach by 2030, which is a really tricky time. I think it helps us enhance that conversation. I know it's long-winded, but I think there's many, many variables around why it's controversial. Some of those are completely outside our control as an insurance organization or insurance industry. So what can we offer? So that's the way we approach it.
Roland?
Yeah, that was a super sort of macro summary of the situation. Perhaps I'll take it down to individual company level. There's two challenges with sustainability and sort of ESG strategies. The first is, as you've touched on, it's just intellectually difficult, intellectually complicated. There's so much to it. And there's so many factors and forces, and there are hundreds of frameworks and a million initiatives to sign up to. I mean, it's overwhelming and bewildering, and that's just in one country, and then you have to look after 20 countries. So that's, if you like, the one challenge. But the second challenge, and it's the elephant in the room. Let me just pick one example. I mean, how are we going to decarbonize? And the growing recognition amongst policymakers and financial regulators that actually the way that capital, both investment capital, credit, as well as insurance, and wider professional services interface and provide access to capital and professional services to industrial sectors will be could be a very powerful and relatively apolitical way of shifting investment from one part of the economy to the next. So there is going to be quite an emphasis on how companies that we all work for are going to be required to decarbonize and manage the carbon in what's known as their financial emissions. No one really cares that much about how much electricity we use in our offices. It's how much we insure or how much we invest in different sorts of companies who are either producing or emitting a lot of carbon. And although we can all be very comfortable about signing up, perhaps, or many would be relatively comfortable about signing up to commitments to 2050, carbon is a bit like losing weight. The first kilo is the easiest. It gets harder and harder. So we can easily sort of perhaps divest of a few things we didn't really want to get into anyway. We can take a bit of a haircut here and there. But actually, once you start losing the second kilo, you're going to have companies are having to start thinking, particularly mature companies, very seriously about how they're going to handle some of their most important clients, some of their most important lines of business. And I don't think really anyone in our sector has got a true, confident handle on how they're going to navigate that individually or collectively. And I can say that openly because I think it's a challenge for all of finance. I read with some concern the amount of I read with some happiness the amount of investment going into certain sort of renewable energies. It sounds very impressive until you see still the investment as well as the public subsidy going into fossil fuels for exactly the reasons that you were just mentioning. It's obviously absolutely essential for many economies, maybe not for all. So, and that's why it's so challenging, and it's going to be a problem for because there are winners and losers, both in terms of money, but also, frankly, power. So I think in the end, the insurance sector and our expertise is probably going to be called upon to act as some sort of adult in the room to help us balance these risks of what ultimately will happen to our way of life if we don't do anything about it, but it requires short-term costs. And I suppose my final comment at this stage is, this isn't about saving the planet. Any time you hear someone saying this is about saving the planet, please tell them it's not about saving the planet. The planet will be perfectly fine without us. It'll be the next big sort of event, but it will go on. What we're talking about is the protection of our way of life, our economy, ultimately, civilization. That's what's at risk. And that's what we have to figure out as professionals, how we navigate industry by industry, country by country, and ultimately globally. And who better than the Global Insurance Forum to act as the convener of that discussion?
I think another similarity between sustainability and losing weight is both our lifelong journey, at least for me. So earlier in the video, Michelle said that the industry is almost at an inflection point of our sustainability journey, and that this is now an acid test of our conviction to the topic. Do you agree?
I think that's an interesting point. So when I told you my background was as an engineer, so when you say acid test, I think of a litmus test, and then what exactly that is. Not, So is it an acid test with a absolute deadline point, in time when it either has crossed that inflection point and that it's got a path, or it hasn't? No, I personally don't think. I think we're there yet. I don't think we'll ever be there. I think it's an evolution, and I think that some of the issues that the insurance industry faces, it doesn't matter if you're a broker or a carrier, is how you bring together the purpose, if you like, of what insurance is doing around the sustainability part. And I think if I, again, look at sort of traditional risk transfer, yes, insurance can do that absolutely perfectly, provide best practices around how you ensure that if you're building offshore wind power plants, you deal with that from the point of inception, of design, all the way through to getting the project cargo there, all the way through to structured solutions. That the insurance industry can definitely provide a very straightforward product. Although we are still very siloed in insurance, so we need to be a lot better at bringing those products to the fore and being able to help there. I think if it's, I think there's other parts of insurance are quite interesting. So some companies have made sustainability core to themselves, to their DNA, and they're very public about it. Other companies at the other end of the scale are sort of just following what the regulatory requirement is. So you've got a breadth of areas there. You've got, forums like the Net Zone forum, a net zero insurance sort of forum that everybody committed to and then pulled out because they were worried about sort of the US regulators sort of accusing them of fixing prices and cartels. So the industry is struggling to deal with where it fits in some ways as a collective. So I think it's how we approach across the whole industry, how we're trying to find solutions. If you're for clients, so if you're a broker or a carrier, it's what are you trying to do to improve the products that we have that actually provide a solution to what the challenge is. So I don't think it's about we're better than the other part of the industry because we do this. And just one last point. I mentioned to you, Daisy, I was in Vancouver on a conference the other day. We've just got back. And we had, one of the interesting points about insurance for me is we had a chap from Morgan Stanley come and talk about how the bankers and the investors look at insurance and what do they look for and what the market value of insurers are. And there was a list of insurers put up there with their market value and what investors are looking for. So if the model that attracts capital is just shareholder performance, or it's just growth models and it's not integrated to sustainability, that's what people will do. So I think there's a dilemma in the fact that as organizations, there's still business to be done, and the market takes a look at it with a nodding, yes, it's good to hear you're doing that, but are the investors actually really interested in that? This is just a question. Are they interested in that, or are they just interested in the returns they get from their investment? And if it's just that, then I think that's a challenge for the whole industry to be able to really change, because they're driven by investment and shareholders' dividends. So, I think there's some fundamental issues. It's not just insurance industry that has to deal with, but it's how investors are looking at the industry.
I can only agree with much of what you said, but I'm going to try and be a bit half glass full, okay? Because I'm strangely hopeful, actually, for our industry in this space. So the first thing is, I don't think anyone's feeling much safer out there. So I think people are looking for help. I think to your point about what investors are carrying on as business as usual, ultimately, this issue is about retraining the invisible hand. We need to retrain the invisible hand to take a whole set of risks which are currently not being properly encoded into decision-making and valuation, so that actually capital can be properly allocated. We've actually done that so many times in an industry, but we've been so close to it, we haven't seen it. We are the only industry in the world that has taken physics and translated it into finance. We call it CAP modeling. We don't call it climate, but that's what it is. It's the most incredible intellectual journey from the early 90s to take the most extreme risks that have never happened before, convert them into an annualized figure, integrate them into the DNA of our capital management and regulations require 1 in 200-year resilience, and then take that model and apply it across all of our financial frameworks. So that when, Andreas, I look at the Swiss Re annual report, which I always do, because I always use it as an object lesson, because at the back of that report, your risk officer shows how all of your risks are managed to a 1 in 200-year regulatory requirement. You have much more solvency than that, of course, but all your risks, liability, financial, are brought into a common framework. That is absolute intellectual dynamite. And now everybody else is groping towards how do they do that in banking, in finance, and investment. And actually what we've got to do is take that brilliant wine, put it into a slightly different wine bottle with a new label, new grape, and provide that to investors, starting with our own investors, I hasten to add, investors and bankers and others. And once we do that, then we'll begin to change the rules of the game for the right reasons. But then I think there are other opportunities too. I mean, there is going to be a massive requirement in investment in infrastructure renewables. One of the things I'm scratching my head is, where is the insurance capacity going to be for that? If we're going to go anything like the transition that we all read about, we're going to have to think very carefully and significantly about how we're going to sort and manage out that capital. So there are all sorts of opportunities. But my dream would be, frankly, that in 3 years' time we're at this stage here, Andreas, in Singapore or wherever, and actually sitting here, isn't me. It's a group of 6 of the world's most influential economists who are craving, actually, because they never talk about insurance, because they don't know anything about it. Not the industry, but just the way of thought. We have the world's top economists, we have the world's top think tanks here because they realize that in this domain there is the seed of actually what needs to be taken and propagated more broadly. So perhaps to echo Michelle's words, we have to be bolder and more confident and get out there, but we have to meet the world where it is. We have to talk to them in a language that they actually feel comfortable and understand, which means talking in a way that we risk being laughed at by our colleagues. And that's why actually we hold back, because we're scared about being laughed at by our own tribe, when we have to take our expertise and describe it in a rather more sort of accessible way, and we worry about what our colleagues will think. We have to break that. The world needs us to break that habit.
Again, I want to reference what Michel said in the video, and he said that there's now almost too much emphasis on the E of ESG, and without balancing the society or social element. So how do you see that?
So, I mean, there's obvious examples. If it's wind farms off Scotland and, people not particularly liking wind farms, or there's, electric vehicles, or there's the solution, well, actually, you need to do quite a lot of mining to get the material for electric vehicles. If it's, I think there's examples, easy examples where they're acting in silos, and I think from an environmental perspective, there is just one other example. Actually, in London, there was they're really cleaning up the air, but they're not, and they're providing a lot more control of cars that enter in and out of London. So there's a lot of initiatives that are absolutely right under the E part of ESG that are aimed at improving the climate. And there's a time pressure on that. If it's, you look at the numbers, if we don't spend 32 trillion by 2030, the world will be a disaster. If it's whatever, by 2050, 125 trillion. So people are talking about the investment that has to be made. So there's a pressure on the E to deliver, and it's from a engineering project sort of perspective, that's difficult. From a political perspective, that's difficult. Now, when it comes to the S part of it, and I look again at Asia, you think about renewables in Asia. For example, one of the big renewable sort of initiatives is hydro. But hydro, if it be in China or be in India, it causes problems to the local populace as well in terms of their, agriculture and they're generally the lower income part of the food chain, if you like. So I think where there needs to be some better understanding is how you bring this demand that is quite real to deliver renewable power, for example, and replace fossil fuel, to actually how that's being moderated with society. And I don't really see that as I presume the way to do that is to, bring a lot more discussions around how we govern those two together. So Do I think there is, tension between E and S, or I think that potentially, yes. Do I think it could be dealt with in a more cohesive manner? Yes, I think there's obvious areas, and where that balance isn't right at the moment.
I completely agree with that, and I'd actually like to build on it. So, of course, one of the first things we all learn if we do risk modeling is you worry about the hazard, whatever it might be, the weather or the floods or the cyber risk or whatever, or the inflation rate. But actually what really matters are the vulnerability functions on whatever asset you're seeking to protect. How wealthy are those people already? How actually vulnerable is my building? How vulnerable is my mental health? Actually, that's what really drives the loss calculations. And so actually what I am concerned about climate, I think most people are, but actually I'm far more concerned in the short term about social and political dislocation, which will actually render us completely incapable to cope and confront these bigger challenges. That's the biggest issue, and that's an issue that's frankly right here and now. But actually, there again, it's our industry, and I take our industry in the broadest sense, that is actually the perfect vehicle to address that issue. So some research done at Cambridge just before the Glasgow Climate Summit showed that I think it was 27% of global GDP, 27% of global GDP is spent in risk-sharing systems. We call it welfare, we call it social insurance, we call it the insurance industry, we call it catastrophe bonds. But it's basically communities coming together through taxation or through insurance premium to create pooled assets, which are then an entitlement if certain things happen. I reach 60 years old, I become unemployed, I get hit by a hurricane. It's an amazing global system. And I did some research on how did that all happen? If we'd been having this meeting 100 years ago, insurance systems would have been the most high-level political issue. In my own country, in Britain, it was Lloyd George and Churchill who worked together in 1906 and 1910 to create the Social Insurance Acts, inspired by what Bismarck had done in Germany in the 1870s. Why? To confront a political risk that society was becoming so dislocated that in those days they were all worried that Britain or Germany would go Bolshevik. But actually, it was an absolutely crystal clear moment. That happened again, happened in the New Deal in the US. It was all the same thing. These days we call it, this is the buzzword, a just transition. How will we create a just and fair transition, whether it's for someone in the wrong part of West Virginia, who through no fault of their own is going to have a very different future? How do we protect them, as well as someone in the global south? So the just transition. It happened more recently, in 1944, 5, 6. I just read the biography of Clement Attlee. Clement Attlee was the prime minister who defeated Churchill at the end of the Second World War, a Labour politician. He'd been in the national government. And I hadn't realised, because, why would you? You see all these cheering crowds looking happy. In the UK and around the world, populations were so hopeless about the future. They'd faced, in the previous 30 years, 2 world wars, 1 Great Depression. They had absolutely no hope in their future. They would not have children. They would not invest. So in the UK, we created the welfare state through Beveridge. It was replicated in Japan and elsewhere, not the exact plan, but the same principle, to give people a sense of security so that actually they could build, invest, reproduce. We are getting to that same stage now. The Shadow Chancellor in the UK probably will become the Chancellor at the next election, Rachel Reeves, talks about a new concept. It's called securonomics. That's our world. So the big challenge we face is how can we help the world create a just transition, which is going to require private, public, and all broad forms of insurance to understand, manage, and share this risk locally and globally across generations. Who else in the world could actually create that gearbox but us? There's no one else. When you read in the paper, you think, oh, well, they should do something about it. They are us. There's no one else. I promise you. I've looked. But what an opportunity. What an opportunity to take our industry from where it was 100 years ago, at the center of intellectual and political life, and rediscover that role. Because the world, unlike 100 years ago, if we don't make these changes now, in 30 years' time, the risks will be so great, it'll be too late to do anything about it.
So, do you feel that we are now doing enough to facilitate and transparent and open dialogue about our concerns, the elephants in the room, to move the topic forward?
I'm strangely enough, I'm very optimistic about the future, I think, because I think insurance, from my whole career, insurance has been about providing global best practices and understanding. I think you have to have the open discussions in the room. I think it's important that we create environments like this forum, for example, and create environments where we can do that. I think it's important to understand, that different parts of the world face different challenges. So I think the real opportunity for insurance is to add value. From my perspective, is to say, look, what can we do and get all the parties around the table. One of the things that I think we shouldn't do as an insurance industry is not be at the table. I think that's really important. Now, I think that's a challenge, for people, for parts of the industry where they don't want to be involved in the discussion because it will impact their business, and they see in the short term. I mean, we see this. There's a little bit of that silo still going on. So we stand here and talk about, how we can have an open discussion, elephant in the room, and I will, and then you go back to your organization, and then there's the table in the far right-hand corner sitting there thinking, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but I'm going to get paid my bonus in 3 years' time based on this business model, so that's all I'm concerned about. So I think it's how you break down the way the industry itself is looking at itself is still a bit siloed, I think. I think it's a watershed moment, I think, for insurance. This is one part of that watershed moment to get everyone to start thinking about how we think about solutions. And I think, you have to have more forums, but practical, not political.
Well, time is getting short. I see I've got 2 minutes, Daisy. So I'll tell you what gives me hope. I think I can't see because it's so bright. I think James Vickers is in the far corner, and I was like chairman of Gallagher, but we used to work at Willis Re in the reinsurance department there, from sort of late 90s onwards, and we witnessed how the demography of our business changed completely, so that actually the brightest analysts in analytics and cat modeling and all the rest of it, within 20 years, literally, the workforce had sort of changed from the age of sort of 25 upwards, and by then they were in their sort of early 40s. Some of the absolutely most brilliant people. But that was perhaps slightly more in the sort of analytical side. If you were a great climate scientist, you might go and work for a reinsurer. Now, and please suspend disbelief, but I promise you it is true, the emerging talent, as well as mid-career specialists in the world of climate, which is where I spend most of my time, have decided that the lily pad to have the most impact in the real economy, to make the impact, and also to have a great career, is insurance. I say that again. The brightest and most insightful people in this space are now waking up to the fact that our market is the center place to have the biggest impact as well as a good career if this is their passion. And that's just in climate. There's something going on. I think sometimes we don't realize it. We've got to capture that. And not just in climate, and everything else too. We're like the industrial equivalent of Clapham in London. Faded glory, suddenly being rediscovered and now one of the most expensive and most attractive parts of the city. That's us.
So thank you very much for sharing your insights. So we've left some time for questions from you. And
well, thank you for that. And I'm feeling very inspired being part of the insurance industry. Thank you very much, Rowan. I appreciate that. Let's move to a few questions here. So the first world insurers are reducing capacity for developing country power producers, including coal, even when transition plans are in place. From Asia, this looks like greenwashing, as these insurers support coal as a sector for 100 years. Any views on that?
I don't know enough about the details of the question, but I can absolutely imagine that that's happening. And we've got to find a more transparent way of figuring out how to allocate our capital. I remember there's a great example I'm aware of essentially a coal and fossil fuel program in Uganda. And it's a very clear view. I mean, of the remaining carbon budget, Uganda's probably got a pretty good call on that. How should we allocate our remaining carbon budget between countries? I would also say that perhaps that's an opportunity, and within, as you said, a transition plan. I mean, I obviously caveat what I'm saying within that, but maybe that's a call for Asia to develop more of its own local capacity, which can be calibrated to its own political environment within a broader framework of net zero to 2050. Underwriting sovereignty.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously something we come across a lot in Asia. You know, so as I said, 48% of the power is still produced from coal, right? As an organisation, we've taken a view on how we want to deal with that. We want to be there to help clients through the transition, but we also recognise that we can't keep supporting, construction of coal-fired power stations. So, but for our existing clients, we'll say, look, you need to show us something that's very clear with your energy transition. Now, it depends which type of organisation you're in. For some organisations, the pressure they have from their shareholders means that they have to take a different response. Now, is that response right or wrong? I'm making no judgment on that, but there is a different pressure. And going back to that question about the elephant in the room, there is a different pressure on different organisations on how they have to publicly and absolutely show how they're dealing with this issue. But if you're a client and you've been with a carrier for many years, if it's coal or oil sands or whatever, and then you're told that after never having a loss that we don't want anything to do with you, yeah, of course there's a concern that why would you not help us?
Yes.
It's a difficult one.
Very tricky. Very tricky. Well, perhaps one more question. What more can we do to enhance sustainability of the industry at macro level and help our clients achieve their sustainability goals at a micro level?
Whoever wrote that question is a genius, because that is the question. No one's really got the right answer for that. I can't sit here and give you the answer to that question. It's worth putting up on the screen. It's such a good question. If in this domain the IIS had an exam question that we all have to collectively answer and enable our leaders individually within companies and across industry to address. But if we address that question, actually we solve to some degree the formula for the wider economy. It's that question. I'll read it out again. What more can we do to enhance sustainability of the industry at a macro level and help our clients achieve their sustainability goals at a micro level? Such a good question, it's beyond answering.
I love the answer, actually.
Well, yeah, I think this is where the industry is struggling, because it's wrestling with this: how do we how do we deal with that at a macro level? I think, just speaking from the financial institution that I belong to, we need to engage with the regulator, we need to engage with non-profit organizations, we need to engage with the best practice groups, and we need to bring to those discussions the concerns and the problems our clients have at a micro level, and that's what we need to do. We need to be at the table.
We need to be at the table. Do we have time for one more? Do you think we tackle this one? What are the small wins in sustainability that the industry can achieve in the short term over the next 12 to 18 months? And how can the reinsurance industry support your business in achieving them? Daisy, that's almost for you.
Well, you know, there are so many. I mean, my pet one is that there's some research coming out from the University of Cambridge in about 3 weeks' time, which illustrates how insurance systems can absolutely play the structural role in protecting the most vulnerable countries from climate shocks and disasters over the next few decades. No one else but the industry could have created something that actually evaluated that risk in quantitative terms at a national economy level for these countries, projected it out to 2050, explained how that risk could be shared, the powers of diversity, and literally how much it would cost. And if our industry can sit at the table and provide that plan that protects the 50 most vulnerable countries and ensures they don't lose more than X percent of their economy, that would not only be incredibly powerful for those countries and then liberate investment and a sense of security and a sense of hope, but actually they're the canary in the cage. It will apply far more broadly. So as well as some small wins, I'd love one or two structural wins which essentially take our existing expertise and put it out there in a way that people go, oh, right, yeah, this is more than just, protecting one small country about one thing. And so that would be mine.
So, yeah, I mean, Ron, you didn't mention the cat bonds that Howden developed, which I think are, excellent. So, Howden's have done a great job in producing products that are innovative. So I think when I look at the short term, we need to recognize innovative products already there. So, we talk about parametrics being innovative, then it's not innovation, but how it's been applied at the moment with much better data, particularly as I'm seeing in Asia, is something we need to recognize, and the industry is doing that very well. I think that's really good. I also think we need to think how we provide your more traditional risk transfer, but much more efficiently across all the different silos, which takes far too long for clients to have to get a solution from the marine department, the energy department. It's too long. We need to be much better at our solutions. How we deliver our solutions to clients is old-fashioned on that traditional risk transfer sort of axis. And then I think where I see, so we need to celebrate where we do things better, like the cat bond, where better parametric solutions. We need to look at the reinsurance industry and structured reinsurance, for example, I think is a great area to sort of play in and have just better dialogue. But I think the most important thing is that we identify how we have helped, we identify the challenges, we look at much better examples of open source modeling, so we're not just looking back and we're not just spending the last, this is what happened and this is what we're going to do, because that's how the reinsurance industry is looking at, Nat Cat now, I can't actually insure anything in Florida now. I mean, there are certain parts of the world that insurance is just walking away from, the reinsurance industry. So I just think we need to be forward-looking, we need to celebrate success as an industry, and I think that would be fantastic.
Do you want to add something to that, Daisy?
Yeah, perhaps I'll wrap with what I started in the beginning of House History on the life and health side. Look at sustainability is the 3 A's: accessibility, availability, and affordability. So certainly through all the 3 A's, the reinsurers can offer a lot of our risk insights into simplifying underwriting, offering insurance products to segments that didn't have access to insurance before, and also at the same time balancing the risk aspects of our portfolios. So definitely there's a lot of room for the reinsurers to play as well. So thank you very much, Paul and Rowan, and certainly I hope that you enjoyed the session as well.
It's been a great session, everybody. Thank the panel, please.